In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Beloved Orthodox Christians, I decided to record this video based on several questions that I received from the faithful, questions, comments that deal with the one interesting topic, I'm sure interesting for all of you. And instead of answering just or addressing just with those faithful this topic, I decided to use it as an opportunity to record a video and send it out publicly at large to our whole church, hoping that if anybody else has similar questions about the topic, this video will answer those questions. So what is the topic that I'm referring to? It has to do with the duties and responsibilities of a bishop. I guess of late, since I've been traveling to Europe for the past 2 years, on top of all the travels that I used to do in North America and in Latin America, some faithful have had questions about the scope of the bishop's responsibilities, how it's covered, how a bishop decides which parish to go to, how many times, what is the difference between the parishes in the United States or in Canada as opposed to the parishes elsewhere in the world, since we are a church in North America. So on and on, there are questions, and good questions that people following my reports from visiting various missions and meetings with other bishops, or the congregation of bishops that we have once a year, the synod meetings, which I report about. So it seems that people are following this, which I'm very glad to hear. And also they have questions of knowing more about the nature of bishop's work, his duties, responsibilities, his how a bishop should be dealing with the needs of the diocese, the pastoral needs of the parishes that make up the diocese. So I will go into detail. I'll try to go into detail to explain all this and share my thoughts about the not only the teaching of the Church about the bishop's duties, but also share my thoughts and views about the current, let's say, status of our diocese, the needs that our parishes have all over our diocese, how they're met, and how all this is taken care of by bishops. But I'll start with fundamentals. What is a bishop for, and why we have bishops, and what are bishops' duties, role in the church, responsibility, duties, and so forth. So if you have listened to my sermon on the Feast of Pentecost, that is when I address this topic. The bishops were ordained, first bishops were the apostles, obviously. The apostles were ordained as bishops on the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit came upon the church. That's when the apostles were ordained as high priests. Now, as the apostles went about the whole world to preach, they left in each city where they established the church. They left as the head, as the overseer, as episcopos of that church, a certain person. So right in the apostolic writings of St. Paul, we see how Timothy is the bishop of the city of Ephesus, of the church of the Ephesians, and Titus was the bishop of the island of Crete. So the episcopal duty, the episcopal ordination, the episcopal, let's say, calling is right there from the beginning with the apostles and the people that the apostles left behind after them. And that is how the whole apostolic succession can be traced all the way to the apostles. That is, the apostolic succession of those churches that truly are apostolic can be traced all the way to the apostles, because after the people that apostles ordained, these bishops, ordained in their stead other bishops, and on. With time, the bishops of each individual city organized themselves in that region into synods, and the bishop of the main city of that region became the metropolitan. And each region having its synod, which are called the eparchial synod, was in communion with the eparchial synod of the next region, the neighboring region, and all of them together constituted the Church of Christ. So the first thing to make clear is that the bishop's office goes all the way to the apostles, and the bishops today, they play the role of the apostle, just as the apostles they played role and carried the grace that Christ left to them and the Holy Spirit gave them. So also the bishops continue this work in the church, the apostolic work in the church, in taking care of the individual dioceses to which they are espoused. A bishop is like a bridegroom of a bride, the bride being the church and the bishop being the bridegroom. And in theological terms, the bishop also is the icon of Christ, the living icon of Christ, so that just as Christ is espoused to his church, the bride, the church, so also individual bishops being espoused to their brides, the diocese, they are living icons of Christ, through whom Christ distributes his gifts, his mysteries, his grace to the whole church. So that's where the office of the bishop comes from, and that's where the roots of the bishop's office are. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that, and the fathers have said it clearly, that there can't be a church without a bishop, just like there can't be a church without Christ. Christ is the one that gives fullness to the church, because the church is not only his bride but his body, and therefore for a church to function, the church to have connection with Christ, it must have a bishop, because through the ordination that the bishop has received, that goes all the way to the apostles, that particular church can have the mysteries, the baptism, the Holy Communion, chrismation, on and on and on. So without a bishop, there can't be a church. That's why all those churches that claim to exist without a bishop, the Protestant churches that deny even the office of a bishop, greatly err, because there can't be a church without a bishop, and not just anyone as a bishop, but somebody who received an ordination in this, and his ordination is one ring in this long chain of ordinations that go up all the way to the apostles. So that is, in very briefly, the historic and mystical side of explaining what bishops are and what they're for. And now let's talk about what bishop must do, right? The first thing was, as we said, that a bishop should have apostolic succession, right? That is one pillar necessary for a bishop to have legitimacy, and his church therefore to have legitimacy, that he should have apostolic succession, that is, he was ordained by other bishops, that themselves were ordained by other bishops, that themselves were ordained by other bishops, that where all these ordinations went up to the apostles themselves. That's one form of apostolic succession that is necessary for a diocese and its bishop to be legitimate, right? But the other, not only less important, but probably even more important, that this sort of laying succession on the laying of hands, that is of ordinations, is the succession of apostolic faith. And what do I mean by that? That just as apostolic succession in terms of ordinations is one pillar upon which the legitimacy of the church rests, the other pillar is the apostolic faith. That is, the bishop is legitimate as long as he preaches and teaches an orthodox confession of faith. If a bishop, he may have an apostolic succession, but if he starts to preach something else, something other than what the apostles preached, something that is alien to the Orthodox faith, something that the councils didn't teach, the fathers didn't teach, that is, he introduces a heresy, an innovation into his preaching, then he forfeits his legitimacy, because although he might be legitimate in terms of mechanical, in this sense, mechanical transfer and of succession, he forfeits his legitimacy because he is not preaching that which the apostles preached. And that is the situation that we find ourselves with so many bishops in the world orthodoxy, where they do have a succession in terms of laying on of hands. That is, that they received ordination from people that in turn received ordination from others, and all the way to the apostles. But because they preached something the apostles didn't preach, in this case ecumenism, which is a heresy, and it's an anti-Christian, unorthodox belief, doctrine, then they themselves forfeit legitimacy and cut themselves off from the church. That is why, following in the footsteps of Saint Philaret, of Archbishop Auxentius, and Ahmed Shrout and Ephrem, and all the other holy people that went before us, we do not recognize these people as legitimate bishops. To repeat, although they might have the automatic, let's say, mechanical ordinations, that is, they are connected mechanically to this chain of ordinations that goes up to the apostles, because they do not confess or do not stand on that second pillar, that is, of apostolic faith, then this mechanical ordinations, that is, having ordinations, laying of hands, is empty. It in fact is mechanical, not mystical anymore. It has no content in it, because if a bishop preaches something that is not orthodox, grace departs from him, and therefore even that succession, apostolic succession, which he does have, is of no effect. It's of no let's say, use, because his succession being of the apostles, his faith is not of the apostles, and therefore even his succession becomes empty, mechanical, without any content of grace, right? Therefore, what is this big introduction for? Why am I saying all that? That the prime duty of a bishop is to preach the Orthodox faith. That is his absolute duty and absolute responsibility, that a bishop should preach what the Holy Fathers have preached, that he should rightly divide the word of truth. Those are the apostolic words of St. Paul, which is repeated at every liturgy when a bishop is being commemorated, that we commemorate this bishop because he is rightly dividing the word of truth. That is, he's correctly teaching. He's teaching correctly the faith of Christ, the faith of the apostles, the faith of fathers. And that is why we owe allegiance and obedience to that bishop. Therefore, the bishop's legitimacy, the bishop's, let's say, allegiance to a bishop is conditional. It's not unconditional. That is something that Roman Catholics have, that they put so much accent on the actual ordination, apostolic succession by ordination, that they say that it doesn't matter what a bishop preaches, that ordination itself is sufficient for bishop to be legitimate and respected and so forth and on and on. That's not what we believe. We believe that obviously the succession by ordination, apostolic succession, is important. Without that, one cannot be an ordained bishop. But even that depends, its efficacy of this ordination depends whether a bishop is preaching apostolic faith. Apostolic succession depends on apostolic faith. And if apostolic faith is not being preached, then the apostolic succession is of no effect. Just as we just mentioned the World Orthodoxy bishops who forfeited our allegiance to them because they betrayed the Orthodox faith. Roman Catholics, they have, by, let's say, if we describe this apostolic succession as laying off on hands, right, one after another, they do have, in that sense, a connection with the apostles by, let's say, laying on of hands of bishops after bishops, because the Church of Rome goes all the way up to Saint Peter, right, and Saint Paul, the apostles. But because they have stopped preaching the faith of St. Peter and St. Paul and introduced novelties into the Church, then this laying off on hands, that is the ordinations or the connection that they claim to have through ordinations with the apostles, is of no effect, is of no purpose. It has no content, no grace, and therefore no legitimacy. Therefore, the most important thing that the bishop, that depends on a bishop, and on that depends whether he should be recognized as a bishop and obeyed as a bishop, is whether he's preaching the Orthodox faith, whether he's faithful to his vows that he made when he was ordained. Because if any of you have witnessed a bishop's ordination, you know that he has to thrice he makes confession of faith in front of all the other bishops and all the whole clergy and the faithful congregated there, where he vows obedience to the doctrines of the ecumenical and local councils, to the canons of the ecumenical and local councils, and vows also a bond of love and obedience to the Church and his fellow bishops. Therefore, if he breaches any of these teachings and starts to teach something that is alien to the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, that he teaches something that is contradictory to the faith of the fathers, the Orthodox faith, the doctrines of the Orthodox Church, then he himself both cuts himself off and anathematizes himself, because he had vowed during the ordination that if he were to breach any of these vows, if he were to break any of these vows, then may he be an anathema and may he be separated from the Church. Therefore, from his own mouth, every bishop promises faithfulness to the faith, and also puts a condition upon himself saying with his own mouth that he will be faithful to the faith, and on that faithfulness will depend whether the parishioners and the whole diocese will be faithful to him, right, and obedient to him. And if he were to break that promise, then he himself puts upon himself the anathema and separation, that is, that he should be cut away from the church. Therefore, that is why preaching the Orthodox faith is the primary responsibility of a bishop, and that is what I want to make sure that we all understand. We are faithful to our bishops because they preach the Orthodox faith, not because they have nice vestments, and not because they have high mitres, and not because they have, iron staffs and chant nicely or whatever. All those things are today admired in bishops, and people are, are mesmerized by the beauty of. All that is good and nice, but it's secondary. All that is secondary. The primary is whether a bishop is preaching the Orthodox faith, and whether he is in communion with other bishops that are also preaching the Orthodox faith, and whether he is not in communion with anyone who is preaching a heterodox teaching, a heresy, right? So that is the foundation of a bishop's work, of his calling, of his legitimacy, of his status as an Orthodox bishop. And because of that, we owe allegiance to a bishop and obedience to him, because he's faithful to the fathers, right, and to the councils. That's why we are obedient and faithful to the bishop. But if he were to be disobedient and unfaithful to the fathers and the councils, then we owe no allegiance and no obedience to that bishop. So a bishop's obedience to a bishop is conditional to his obedience to the faith, to put it shortly, right? So that is the primary thing. I just explained about the ordinations, apostolic succession by ordinations, which is important, but even more important is the succession of apostolic faith, that is, that we should be not only ordained in that same line of the apostles, but also we should perpetuate and defend and preach the faith that the apostles preached, right? So these are the two pillars upon which a church and its bishop, its bridegroom, the bishop, stand. And having made that clear, I hope, now I want to move to the more pertinent issue that I wanted to talk about, the actual work of a bishop, right? Because once we have made that clear, that the bishop preaching the Orthodox faith is the most important job of him, it doesn't stop there, obviously. It can't be that a bishop should simply declare that he believes in the Orthodox way and then do nothing, right? That's not, it's no good. A bishop has a calling to take care of his diocese, and taking care of his diocese entails all those things that I will explain. The relationship between the bishop and the church, his diocese, can be compared to of a shepherd and the flock, right? Just as the shepherd is there to oversee that the flock or the sheep that he's taking care of won't go to places where they will injure themselves, or that they will have a grazing places where to graze, good grazing places, that they are hedged around at night, and there no wolf comes to attack. They are protected, that he has a staff with which he will guide them, not to go that way but to go that way. It's a good metaphor for what a bishop's responsibility is. Also, the church teaches, gives us another metaphor of a vineyard and the laborers, right? Vineyard is the church, and laborer, and the vineyard is the bishop. Just as the vineyard needs to be constantly monitored, whether it's been irrigated, whether some parts maybe need more water than the others, some parts maybe need pruning earlier than the others, that everything is in order, that he looks whether the fruit is being brought forth by the vineyard, and here he constantly goes about the vineyard to make sure that everything is in order. So also a bishop, that's a very beautiful metaphor of a bishop's relationship with his church. So what does this work of a bishop, apart from being orthodox, right, mean? First and foremost, it's in visiting the parishes and celebrating divine mysteries with them and preaching the word of truth to them. That is the primary, let's say, day-to-day work of a bishop, that besides being orthodox to start with, right, by his confession of faith, by his faithfulness of not endorsing anything alien, bishop's work is visiting his parishes, his faithful, wherever they may be, whether it be in parishes or monasteries or chapels or missions, or sometimes even individual families that are isolated, visiting them, preaching to them, before preaching, providing holy mysteries to them, right? And preaching to them the Orthodox faith, and hearing from them many times confessions, or if not directly from the parishioners, hearing confession and guiding the clergy that he has appointed in each place for that purpose. I should explain that at the beginning, each bishop had one church, and there was one church in the city. So Ephesus, for example, right? Timothy was the bishop of Ephesus. There was one church in Ephesus, everybody congregated there, and Timothy was the bishop there. Therefore, that was the extent of his diocese. And that was, for the first 2-3 centuries, that was the way the church was organized. Each city where apostles had preached, there was a congregation, and that congregation had a place where to worship, and that place of worship was taken care of by the bishop. Bishop was the celebrant. Bishop was the one that did the baptisms, he celebrated divine liturgy, he chrismated, he prayed over people, he did the absolution, he basically what today a parish priest does, right? That he takes care of all the needs of his parish, of that place, of people congregating in one place. That what it used to be with the bishops. The bishops were the sole celebrants. They are the ones that celebrated on every Sunday, and the presbyters, they were co-celebrants with him. They celebrated with him, and the deacons obviously served as well. But that was the place where the bishop was, where he served, where he attended to his church. That was his church. And another city, for example, Smyrna, which is close to Ephesus, had his own bishop, and bishop had his church there, and he didn't have to move anywhere. He was there, he lived by the church, he served in that church, and the presbyters didn't serve on their own. They served with the bishop. They were helpers of the bishop in his liturgical services. Now, things changed with the coming of the peace of the church with St. Constantine, where the churches started to open all over the place. So there was no just one church in one city. There were many churches in one city, and not only in the city, but in the surrounding area, in the rural areas, in the villages around that city, that metropolis where the bishop was a bishop of, right? There started to pop up churches there too. Now, what to do with that? Well, that's where the church started to give blessing to presbyters to attend to those churches on their own. That is, until there was one church in the city, the bishop was the sole celebrant. He's the one that celebrated the liturgy, and the presbyters were his helpers, and deacons there were to attend to the altar. But once many churches started to pop up in the same city and same area around the city, then bishop couldn't be on each Sunday at multiple places, right? So that is why, so that each church would have a Sunday liturgy, and nobody would be deprived of the mysteries wherever they congregated, the church started to give blessing. The bishop started to give blessing to presbyters that they should serve without him, each of the churches. So a presbyter was appointed, or presbyter was ordained from among the people of that church, and he had the blessing to serve there on his own without the bishop's presence, or rather, bishop was present with him through the antimension. That is the reason why we use antimension. Antimension is that cloth that is always rests on the holy table. It's a cloth upon which we serve. We put the paten and the chalice, and on which the holy mysteries are served, the divine liturgy is served. And the antimension is consecrated by the bishop and signed by the bishop and given to a priest, who in his turn deposits that antimension in his church, in the altar of his church, and now he has a blessing, a signed blessing from his bishop, that he can officiate alone. Without a bishop, alone he can officiate in the name of his bishop in that particular church. And another presbyter receives also another antimension, and he deposits it in the altar in his church, and bishop in a way is present invisibly with the priest through his antimension, the consecrated antimension, which is the sign that bishop gave blessing for a presbyter to serve, and that he's present with him, and therefore that liturgy is legitimate. It is not done by somebody who just donned priestly vestments on him and started to play liturgy, right? It can happen, and it does happen. Well, how do we differentiate? A presbyter can serve only if he has a blessing from his bishop, and this blessing is conveyed through the antimension. And that's where the giving out of antimensions started when a bishop in his diocese didn't have just one church anymore, but he had numerous churches, 10, 20, 30. It went into hundreds, and in some places thousands of churches, depending on which region we're talking about, whether in Roman Empire or Persian Empire or the Russian Empire. Depending of what region he was a bishop, he could have numerous churches, right? So a bishop couldn't be in numerous churches at the same time. Therefore, the system was devised so that presbyters would serve on behalf of the bishop through the antimension that they were given on every Sunday, and that way everyone could partake of mysteries. Nobody was deprived of the mysteries, and the clergy, that is the presbyters, would celebrate and give out holy mysteries to people as if the bishop was there through the blessing of the antimension. But the bishop himself, he would, when this time came, right, when there were numerous churches in a diocese, not like before when bishop had just one church and he just lived and served there, and that was his diocese. Now that there are many churches in the diocese, bishops started to move around and celebrate each Sunday in a different church, and sometimes it took them several years to make one tour of their diocese. We know of such cases, especially in the Russian Empire. The Bishop Juasov of Belgorod, it took him several years to pay one visit to each of his churches. Imagine how many churches he had. Several years. So he was constantly on the move. He didn't have one place where he lived. Yes, he had the cathedral church where he was ordained, and that was the center, his base camp, let's say, right? But he hardly saw his cathedral because he had to move from one church to the other, and transport in the old days was slow. He had to move from one church to the other so that everybody would get a chance to both be partakers of divine liturgy with the bishop in his hierarchical liturgy, and to listen to his teaching, and to attend to his advice, right? So that is where the current layout came about from, when bishops were first 3 centuries, bishops had just one church to attend, and that was their both cathedral and diocese, and they were the sole celebrants in that church. But then with the peace of St. Constantine, many churches started to be opened in each region, and that meant that every bishop had various, at least dozens of churches to attend to, and they would do that by traveling from one church to the other, and thus visiting every one of them and making sure that the celebrations were done properly, that the clergy were tending and to their responsibilities properly, that if there were any queries or any questions or any comments or anything that people wanted to convey to the bishop about anything, some things problematic, others not so problematic, right? The bishop was there to hear and to listen and to make a ruling on these things, that is, attend to the pastoral needs of the people, that yes, they were attended to by the priests, because they, in the bishop's absence, they still celebrate divine liturgy, but there are things, sometimes conflict, sometimes misunderstandings, sometimes all sorts of things, that temptations, let's say, happen in church where a bishop's decision is needed, right? So that the way the bishop rules about the matter, based on the canons, based on experience, based on advice as well among the bishops, that's how things will be, right? And therefore bishop's presence, especially in those times when communication was not like today, that you can text me and I can give you an answer straight away. It wasn't so simple, and writing a letter, even if you could write a letter, sometimes the response would tarry because there were 1,000 other letters that were being sent to the bishop. So the bishop's presence, personal presence in each church, was something that you couldn't substitute with anything, and still you can't, right? Personal presence, personal touch is very important. Therefore, one more thing to add, the tradition of bishops not being married, right, comes from because of that. To explain, when the bishops were bishops of their one church, right, that they had to attend, they didn't have to travel anywhere. Therefore, they were settled, and they married, and they had children, and they lived like a parish priest, right? That's how bishops lived. But once the bishops had to start to travel, go from one place to the other, and they were away sometimes for years without seeing their main cathedral, their place where the center of their church, right? Then it became a matter of urgent need to decide, well, how is the bishop supposed to do that with his family? Is he going to travel with his wife and children with him on without end? That was something very difficult to do. Well, is he going to leave his wife and children behind and go away for months and years on end? Well, that is no good either. So that is why the church, out of practical need, started to select bishops from out of monasteries, out of monks, right? Because monks had no attachment to a family. They didn't have a family to take care of or a family to take with them, and therefore they were free in that sense. They could entirely give themselves to the service of the church without any other responsibilities to family, wife, children, and so forth. And that is where from 5th, 6th century onwards it became a standard that bishops, because the dioceses were so big and there were so many churches needed to be toured and visited, right, that bishops were selected from out of monastics or in some cases out of unmarried clergy, right, people that didn't have commitments with family, with work, with career, and on and on. They could wholeheartedly devote themselves to the church and to that one thing that distinguishes bishops, pastoral activity, from a priest's, that he has to travel constantly. He has to travel and visit all the churches in his diocese. So that is what brings us to today. That many I've heard questions and comments sometimes that well, what is the where this traveling of a bishop comes from. Well, this is where it comes from. A bishop by nature, he's called to travel, to visit each individual church, so that he is both seen to preach the Orthodox faith, that he's there to give consolation, he's there to give answers to questions, he's there to resolve issues that sometimes happen in churches. He's there to to instruct the clergy and see to it that they're doing everything in their power to serve the congregation, and so forth, and on and on. That is the bishop's life, and that is why you see me travel constantly. And the question might be, well, how do I decide which place to travel, which place to go one time or two times? And there is logic to it, a logic that is based on experience of my predecessor, Metropolitan Ephraim, who taught me many things, and I observed how he did things. There's experience from reading the lives of saints, how they did things, and things that I myself got to learn over the past decade or so that I've been serving as a bishop. So the starting point is that, as a minimum, that each parish should receive one yearly visit from a bishop. That is a starting point. There shouldn't be a parish unless there is a big exceptional situation that coincides that bishop cannot go to that parish particularly on their feast day. That's where the bishop visits the parish, on the feast day of the parish. Unless there is an exceptional situation, as a rule, each parish should have one annual bishop's visit, and the bishop will visit the parish, celebrate the vigil for the saint or the feast to which the church is dedicated, celebrate the divine liturgy with the hierarchical divine liturgy with the clergy, and then we usually have, after the celebration, and we have broken the bread, we have taken communion together, we have satiated ourselves in praying together, right? We share conversation afterwards in breaking the earthly bread too, that is in the trapeza, and sometimes we even have question and answer sessions, so that we use to the maximum the visit of the bishop, so that we can squeeze to the maximum everything, all the juice out of him during that visit, which I don't mind at all. So that is the standard, that a bishop should visit all his parishes once a year. Some parishes will need more than one one visits. And why is that? Because a parish might have, let's say, be a parish, but it doesn't have a priest. So there is a congregation, but it doesn't have a priest. Well, what happens then? Obviously, you can send a priest for a visit many times, but if it's a parish that was founded by the bishop himself, right, and the bishop has connection with that parish, it's a fledgling parish, it's just starting, and therefore it needs more attention, then bishop will visit that parish more than once, right? That was the case, for example, when for a whole year I had to go down to Mexico several times a year. Every other month, sometimes every month, I was down there and serving as a priest. Why was that? Why was there such a need? Because first, they didn't have a priest, and therefore even the things that we take for granted, that there will be a priest and we'll have communion every Sunday, was for them a luxury. They didn't have, they had a building, an altar, a congregation, but no priest, right? So that is why I had to travel there in order to not just to visit, but to give them the basics, what a parish needs. Holy Communion, right? Divine Liturgy. And why myself traveling and not sending others? Because of the language. And in those years, we didn't have Spanish-speaking clergy, and therefore I was the only one who could speak in their language, and therefore only one who could do that work of a priest that that parish needed. Therefore, there was a time when I had to attend to this parish more often and with more attention than other parishes. And that is the reason, particularities, that there is need of a priest and there is need of a priest that speaks their language. Since it seems that I was the only one that could do those two things together, I had to travel to that parish more often than to other parishes. And that is just one example of how different it can be, right? Of why some parishes will receive more bishop's visit and some parishes less. And some I've heard some people say, well, the bishop visits other parishes more and our parish just once a year. Well, actually, the fact that I'm visiting just once a year means that things are going so well in the parish, because it means that there are no conflicts, there are no misunderstandings, that the priest is doing such a great job, right, that I can be happy with that one visit to the parish, knowing that that one visit will suffice and do all the things that a bishop's visit does. And the fact that I visit once should be a sign that things are going well in that parish. And another parish, if it needs several visits, it means that there are things that need to be resolved, that things that a clergyman needs to learn and I go there to teach, or things that need to people need reinforcement so much from a bishop that several times a year a visit is needed. So if to anyone who thinks that, well, who has this sort of I would say positive jealousy of why bishop is visiting other parishes more than your parish, well, know that it's because your church is faring well. And I don't make any decisions on chance. I evaluate what the whole year. I evaluate what parish needs more attention, what less. I plan the whole year very meticulously. I take into account all the aspects of reality that maybe individual parishioner and individual clergyman is not aware of. That is the reality in the whole diocese and in the particular parish, and then I plan the visits like that. So that's one thing I just want to reiterate, that a bishop visiting once a year is a standard. That is something that some parishes in the old days didn't get. not in our church. Our church always got from starting from our beloved Metropolitan Ephraim. He put a standard very high, that each parish once a year as a minimum should receive, and I've continued that to this day, with one exception of 1 year last year. Because of my mother's death, I had to miss one parish visit the last year. But as a rule, every parish receives at least one visit from the bishop, and the fact that your parish is receiving one visit and not more is an indication that a parish is very healthy, and the parish is working on its own. Things are looking good. People are trying hard. The clergyman is, the presbyter is trying hard, and therefore things are working. There is no need to do more than one visit, and during that visit do all those things that a bishop does, that I just said: teach, preach, reinforce, encourage, answer questions, listen to grievances, and so forth, and on and on. That is one aspect that I wanted to make clear. Then also about the sometimes, as I said, bishops never had a chance to serve in their own cathedrals in the old days because they were traveling so much. I make sure that our cathedral, I serve in our cathedral of St. Mark's in Boston at least every six weeks, better every 4 weeks, but for sometimes it happens that 4 weeks is not feasible, but at least every 6 weeks that I should be at the cathedral to serve there and to be there. That I have as a rule, something that I try to keep. Obviously last year was an exception. It was an exception in every way because I had to be away for 3 or 4 months, but as a rule that is how I have it, which I think is a good rule to keep. But even without me being there, we have made sure that there should be clergy, there should be presbyters and deacons, and that the cathedral should never have any lack in terms of divine services for the Sundays and feast days. And that is where I'm indebted to our Father Isaac, that although I am the rector, because of how the bylaws of our diocese are done, that the cathedral is the particular church that belongs to the diocese, the Cathedral of St. Mark's in Boston, and according to the bylaws, the Bishop of Boston will always be the rector of St. Mark's Cathedral. That's how we put it after we had the issues in 2012, 2013, and it's a good way that we put it. That's how traditionally it always was, that the cathedral belonged to, as was the bishop's own church. Although I am the rector of the parish, Father Isaac is the vice rector, and when I'm away, Father Isaac makes sure that he should be there at the cathedral, if not every week, then every other week, and then we have the auxiliary clergy, our presbyters and our deacons that serve there. So what am I trying to say here? One point that I want to make is that bishop is never absent. Let's have it clear. Bishop is never absent. He's just present somewhere else. Okay? To everyone listening to this, I would like you to remember this, right? That if bishop is not in the church, in our particular church on a Sunday, it means not that he's absent. He's present somewhere else, because somewhere else has more need, and bishop has the knowledge of which church needs more attention and throughout the year, and which church needs to be visited how many times a year, and therefore based on that he makes those decisions where to be, how many times, but he's never absent, he's just present somewhere else. And we should understand that that is the primary work of a bishop, to distribute his time according to his experience, according to discernment, the knowledge that he has about the churches, to distribute the time not evenly, it will never be evenly, but pastorally, according to need, not simply equal share of time, but time according to need of each parish. That's how I distribute my time, so that each parish will receive what they need. And we should also understand that the needs of our diocese have grown greatly, not just our diocese. I have to be attending our diocese in Boston, but on top of that also the diocese in Toronto. After the repose of Metropolitan Andrew, I have to pay visit to the parishes, the 4 or 5 parishes, Cathedral in Toronto, St. Nicholas, and other parishes. I have to pay visit to them too. On top of that, we have the missions in South America, in Mexico and South America, where the pool of who I can send is very limited because of the language need. Even if I wanted to send somebody else in my stead, like I can send, for example, Bishop John, my auxiliary bishop, to a feast in one particular church, and I go the next year. That's what auxiliary bishops are for, to help with the taking care of the diocese in a place where language is a barrier, right? The options are limited, and therefore I have to be going to places where, because I have the knowledge of the language, I cannot delegate that as easily as I could with English-speaking languages. On top of that, now we also have churches in the Old World, right? We have the growing and blossoming church in Egypt, where I have to visit according to the need that there is twice a year. Maybe time will come when I will visit once a year, but I can see that the need there is that I should visit twice a year for now, and therefore I will not disregard that need, because I'm responsible. I'm answerable for what to providing what the need is. And if I can feel deep in myself, and by talking to the clergy I can see for sure that the need is that I should visit twice a year, that's what I will do. And then there are churches all over Europe. We have church in Georgia, which I visit once a year. We have church in Ukraine that needs visiting, and visiting church in Ukraine is very difficult because of the war there, right? We have church in Latvia, and there are scattered faithful throughout the Western European countries. Well, although we are a church in North America, God has entrusted those people to us, and we cannot look at them as second-rate or secondary of secondary importance. God has put them in our hands, and they appealed to us. We should give them the necessary pastoral care that they need and they deserve. Therefore, that takes an enormous amount of time to attend to those churches there that need attention. Thank God we have a bishop in Russia, and Bishop Spiridon is taking care of the bishops there, of the parishes there in Russia. And on top of that, we now have a friendly relationship with a communion, a Eucharistic communion with Bishop Irinei, who, that's a whole topic in itself, but just the way he described to me and told me his far-flung diocese, all the way from Germany to Kazakhstan, which is the other side of other end of Europe, going into Asia, and parishes around Moscow, and parishes in southern Russia, and parishes in Kyrgyzstan. He doesn't have a place where he stays for more than a month. He doesn't have his base. His cathedral is in Kazakhstan, but he sees it just 3 times a year, because he has to move from place to place where he has a base camp in each place. For example, when he goes to Moscow, he has parishes all around Moscow area, some big, some just families. So he has one place where he stays, right? Then he visits all those parishes in the coming weeks, every Sunday, and sometimes on weekdays. And after exhausting all those parishes by visiting them in a month or in 2, then he moves in southern Russia, and there he stays in one place, and he has to visit all the parishes around there. Then he moves to Kazakh, and so like this, he is like I don't know how to describe the man. He's in his 70s, and yet he exactly does the work of a bishop. If I have a place where I can call home, which is our Holy Transfiguration Monastery, where I am based at, and I make trips out and visit and come back, he doesn't have one. He just has to, the parishes are clustered in such a way that he has to move his base camp constantly and visit parishes from out of that base camp, and then move to another base camp in another area and visit parishes around him. And that's the life of a bishop. That's the life of a bishop. And when I heard that's how he had things, I felt we were. I didn't have any complaints after that. Not that I do, but I understood how hard it was for him to be constantly on the move and constantly shifting from one place to other. And in a way, that's how I had to organize things here in the old world where I'm visiting.